We now return to the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Here we go. I've never taken the life of another, nor have I instructed another to kill. I've been investigating the truth behind the Reaper for years, and I was aware of Gregson's involvement. That's the reason why I went to Fresno Street that day, and how I came to discover the body. The point is that no common thread exists between myself, Gregson, and Dr. Wilson. Clearly, therefore, there is no reason to suspect me of being behind the assassin exchange. So you deny all accusations by the prosecution, both that you are the Reaper of the Bailey and that you are masterminding the assassin exchange. I acknowledge that the public at large believes me to be the Reaper. However, that's a fallacy, which I alone am in a position to forswear. Naturally, the prosecution believes the testimony just given by the accused to be untrue. Ryunosuke Naruhodo. Yes. Let me ask you, why are you here? What really brings you to this courtroom? Does it matter? A desire to uncover the truth, even if the truth proves your client to be guilty? From all my experiences in this courtroom, I've come to realize something. I'm never wrong. I'm the hero. The truth can't be hidden. Sooner or later, it will come out. So it's always my intention to work with my client in pursuit of the truth. I want you to remember what you just said. I will forget. I, as the player, will forget. Enough dilatory chatter. Counsel for the defense proceed to cross-examine the witness. Yes, my lord. I know exactly what you're thinking, Kazuma. I know you're just waiting to point it out. The contradiction, you're convinced, lies somewhere within this man's testimony. Never taken the life of another. So you're not what the general public refer to as the infamous Reaper of the Bailey. Exactly. Don't imagine for a moment that the court will be satisfied with a one-word answer on this. I realize that. If you're intending to comment on every sentence, this could take a while, Kazuma. Didn't you find it disturbing, though, that one by one defendants who'd been acquitted after your unsuccessful prosecution were killed? Let me answer that question by posing another. If one by one defendants who'd been acquitted after your successful defense were killed, would you find that disturbing? Disturbing? I couldn't possibly say how that would make me feel with a one-word answer like that. Exactly. Well, that told me. But even though I'm not the Reaper, that doesn't mean I ignored all the hearsay. I've been investigating the truth behind the Reaper for years.
Hold it!
You say for years. How long exactly? Since the very first time the Reaper's influence was felt in this courtroom. 10 years ago. And your investigations led you somehow to Inspector Gregson, you're saying. I didn't want to believe it. He was a personal acquaintance. We'd worked on cases together in the past. Friend, even? It felt like a betrayal, but I demanded permission to search his office at the yard without his knowledge. Which is when you found his secret notebook, is it? It's when I first learned of the location he'd noted only as grouse and the appointment at 5 p.m. on the 31st. But I didn't know the significance of those details at the time. So now we're at the nub of the matter. As it turns out, the significance for me personally was very unfortunate. That's the reason I went to Fresno Street and came to the body. But why did you go to that specific location? I thought that if it was the Reaper's headquarters, then by turning up there at 5 o'clock I would catch whoever was involved red-handed. Sadly, all that was awaiting me was the inspector's corpse, red-headed. Yes, even though it wasn't designed for you, you walked straight into the trap set by Jigoku. Exactly. Jigoku had intended to implicate Hugh Boone, but unhappily for me, I arrived at the scene first. Ah, a ridiculously careless blunder. Moved on to just throwing insults around, I see then, Kazuma. Think what you will, it doesn't change the truth. The point is, no common thread exists between myself, Gregson, and Dr. Wilson. There is a link between you and Gregson, though. Of course, we were close acquaintances. We'd worked on numerous cases together. I considered the man to be a mentor of sorts. He taught me a number of important lessons. He did? Such as what? Where to buy good fish and chips, and such like. Well, that was convincing. Dr. Wilson was a coroner, of course. But that was some time in the past. And in any case, I understand it was several years ago now that he was invited to work at a Japanese university. That's right. He was a visiting professor at the Imperial Yume University in Tokyo. It should be unambiguously clear then that no link exists between myself and him. In other words, I had no motive for sending some assassin across the oceans to kill the man. It sounds plausible enough, and I want to believe it. But something about this just doesn't quite sit right with me. Alright, so we know that number 4 is where we need to look. Clearly, therefore, there's no reason to suspect me of being an assassin. Certainly, as it stands, there's no evidence to suggest that you concocted the scheme. But, as it stands, we have only the accused's insistence of his innocence. Sorry? Perhaps there is some reason that would explain why he masterminded the assassin exchange, and if a reason could be established later in these proceedings, then the accused's claim in this testimony that he wasn't involved would amount to perjury. Well, yes, that's true, but clearly Kazuma-sama intends to identify a reason and use it to make it his case. So if we don't identify something first, we'll gain the advantage. This could be dangerous. You think? A convincing testimony by Lord Van Zieks. Certainly, with no apparent connection between the three men, there's no way to establish a motive. The testimony seems unassailable as far as I can see. Oh dear me, what a bleak expression. I agree, there doesn't appear to be any particular link between them, at first glance. But with the inclusion of one other person... Must be overthinking it, surely. Another person, Mr. Naruhodo? I need to think back over all the information we've gleaned so far. Alright, and I'll review my notes about the case and all the evidence in the court record. Could it be that Lord Van Zieks has something to hide after all? Alright. It's very, very heavy-handedly telling me that this is... Hey, listen. There's that picture. So, one other person being Clint. Dr. Gory. Okay, signed by Dr. Wilson. So the coroner of Clint was Dr. Wilson. It was signed off by Mikotoba. I think that's what we need. Well, because it would be either, right? Because the two people, Gregson and Dr. Wilson, are what we need to make a connection to. We already know he's got a connection to Gregson, so we need to verify that he's got a connection to Dr. Wilson, which would be his brother.
Objection!
What is this? An autopsy report. Wait, this is 10 years old, from the autopsy of Lord Clint Van Zieks. What? My brother's autopsy report? I'm pleased to see the defense doesn't intend to run from the undeniable truth. Order in the court. What reason do you have for presenting a 10-year-old autopsy report here, counsel? Yes, the autopsy report of the professor's final victim is an indelible link between Inspector Gregson, Dr. Wilson, and the defendant. Not that accursed name again. Professor. I've personally searched all the court records relating to that case. I know that at the time autopsy was considered sacrilege to the victim's souls, and for a member of the aristocracy like Lord Clint Van Zeeks, it was unthinkable. Someone implored the powers that be to allow the autopsy to go ahead, Inspector Gregson. He declared that he was certain he would obtain a conclusive proof from the procedure. And it was Dr. Wilson who conducted the autopsy. His signature is clearly visible on the document. As promised by Gregson, the autopsy did indeed produce evidence. Evidence that conclusively proved Ryunosuke was guilty of the murders. In my brother's dying moments, he mustered all his remaining strength to leave that vital clue behind. Indeed, that was the key to indicting the professor for his crimes and the conclusive evidence that convicted him. It enabled Lord Van Zeeks here to avenge his brother's senseless death with marvelous victory in court. A marvelous victory, was it? I wonder if that's really true. What? Could the same be said if it turned out that the key piece of evidence in question was in fact fabricated? If the inspector, the coroner, and the prosecutor all colluded together to cast an innocent Japanese man as a mass murderer and send him to his death. That's outrageous. And now, 10 years later, for some reason the secret has been threatened and needs protecting, which is why the inspector and the coroner had to be silenced, isn't it? By someone in power in Japan and in Britain, using the two killers recruited for the assassin exchange. Order at once. 10 years ago, my father was convicted in this very courtroom as a mass murderer, to be sentenced to death. But it was all a sham, and I swore to myself that I'd prove it, which is why I had to come to Britain, whatever the cost. You'll have to forgive me if I feel compelled to toast this vengeful Nipponese's tenacity of purpose here. However, he who fails to quash his emotions in the courtroom has failed as a lawyer. Come on, Kazuma, you know this won't wash. You're claiming your father was misrepresented in a trial that took place a whole decade ago. You must see that without evidence, that's nothing more than a wild accusation. As it happens, I have evidence. What? As the court has heard, I crossed the channel to France with Gregson on the 31st. I went with him on the pretext of being the assassin recruited to kill Seishiro Jigoku. My true intentions were to make the inspector tell me the truth. What truth? The truth about the evidence, and he acknowledged what I'd already deduced, that the closely guarded secret about what went on in that autopsy 10 years ago. What? A secret? I know nothing of any secret. While we waited for my supposed merc in Jigoku's cabin, I drew my clan's illustrious sword Kuruma before the inspector's eyes. He very quickly understood what my true motive was, especially since I'm guessing you slashed his trunk and left the tip of the blade in there. Right, I see. You're that Asogi's young lad, are you? And what, you're gonna cut me down with that thing, is it? I've forgotten your voice already, sir. I do your corpse disrespect. That will very much depend on the answers you give to my questions. I want to know what really happened 10 years ago. The truth, that's all. Before we get into it, let me make one thing clear. I still believe your father was a professor. There's no doubt in my mind. But unfortunately, back then, we didn't have the evidence we needed to make the crime stick. So, you admit it then. The evidence used in my father's trial was fabricated. It was for the good of the country. Anyway, all was just following orders. Orders? What exactly did you do? Speak. I'm not saying another word, even if your life depends on it. That's right. Even then. So that's when the tip of the sword broke. Kazuma-sama. If the results of Clint Van Ziek's autopsy were fabricated, then the investigating officer, Gregson, and the lead coroner, Wilson, must have known about it. And they can only have been ordered to pervert the course of justice in that way by one man. The man leading the case for the prosecution, Barak Van Zieks. In other words, the defendant did have cause to organize this exchange of assassins. Exactly. And, as was established earlier, it is to have been the Reaper himself who liaised with Jigoku in Japan to arrange the exchange. So it follows that the Reaper's true identity can only be that of the man who stands accused in this courtroom today, Barak Van Zieks. I would like to point out that you did not, in fact, present evidence, you presented hearsay. I guess it's just assumed that if you're saying something in court, you're not going to skirt perjury, so you would be telling the truth? We have to assume? I don't know. This is fucking anime plot bullshit. Kazuma Asogi. What? What you just told the court. Are you absolutely certain of your facts? Did Gregson really fabricate evidence for that trial 10 years ago? I heard it with my own ears. His shameful admission. In that case, I know the name of the Reaper. But what? What, Van Zieks? I give no such orders. I know that for certain. Which narrows down the remaining possibilities to one. Lord Van Zieks isn't the one behind all this. Then yes, there is only one other person who could have done something like that. I believe I know who it is too. You? I just had a feeling his name was going to come up. The true identity of the infamous Reaper of the Bailey is, obviously, the guy who's been the evil bastard the entire time. He's the only other person who could have liaised between Japan and Britain, as he was the counterpart to Jigoku.
Take that!
The only person who could have arranged the assassin exchange and manipulated the autopsy results is the Lord Chief Justice himself, Lord Mail Strongheart. Lord Strongheart? Yes, it's true that 10 years ago the defendant handled the prosecution of the professor in court, but he only took over the case after his brother, Lord Clint Van Zieks, had been killed. I can only assume that this is the most inappropriate joke in British judicial history. Well, Lord Van Zieks, 10 years ago, I was very new to my profession, but I had a burning desire to avenge my brother's death, so I pleaded for control of the case. The investigation of to that point, the supplication of the lords to allow my brother's corpse to be examined, all the evidence I was given, the autopsy reports, it all came from you. I've spent my life since then believing I was in your debt for the way you stood aside and let me handle the trial. But I see now, I was very much mistaken. It was a hugely influential force that caused the inspector and the coroner to break the law 10 years ago, and that same force was still felt a decade later on the other side of the world by Seishiro Jigoku. Lord Strongheart, everything falls into place when we recognize that you are the Reaper of the Bailey. await your response, my lord. This may very well go down in British judicial history, but I assure you, it is no joke. Consider this a formal accusal by the defense. It doesn't warrant a response. A formal accusal? Don't be absurd. The defense's claims are utter nonsense, a wild fantasy at best. You're not going to defend yourself. Claim there was some wrongdoing with Lord Clint Van Zeeks' autopsy. It's utterly untrue.
Objection!
But I heard it from Gregson's own lips. He admitted to it. And where's your evidence? What? Gregson's dead now, unless you were thinking of summoning a ghost to the stand. You mean to say... I forget how the system works in your little backwater country, but in the courts of the British Empire, without evidence, there is no case. I have no intention of entertaining some wild fantasy that can't possibly be substantiated by anyone or anything. Order. Order in the court! Following Inspector Gregson's murder, and in light of Dr. Wilson's death as well, there's really no one left who could testify about the events of 10 years ago, is there? So that was the real purpose of the assassin exchange. This court has no business raking over the coals of a case that was concluded a decade ago. The accusal brought by the prosecution and the defense is categorically denied. I take it there are no objections. Kazuma has more or less waited his whole life for this moment. Is there really nothing else we can do now? Is there no other avenue we can go down in pursuit of the truth about what happened all those years ago? If only there was someone who could testify about Clint Van Zeeks' autopsy. There must be someone. Actually, well, about the autopsy, actually, yeah, there is, because it's Mikotoba. Mikotoba who penned the report. He's gone to extraordinary lengths to cover his tracks, even so far as dispatching an assassin all the way to Japan to ensure Dr. Wilson's silence, and Dr. Scythe won't say anything against Strongheart. But there's still one ray of hope.
Objection!
Actually, there is one person. One person who could still testify about that autopsy. That would be ridiculous. There's no one left. Who, Ryunosuke? Who? Tell me! Kazuma, Please, this trial can't end. Not yet. Why are you being hesitant if this is helping you too? I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the truth. The person the defense would like to call to the stand to testify about the autopsy of Lord Clint Van Zeeks is...
Take that!
Heaven help us, another Japanese. An expert in forensic medicine, my lord, Professor Eugene Mikotoba. 16 years ago, he came to London with Seishiro Jigoku and Genshin Yosogi as a visiting student. And what could his testimony possibly tell us? Professor Mikotoba was the primary assistant during the autopsy in question. He was also the person who actually penned the report. Incorrect. The autopsy was carried out by the coroner, Dr. Wilson. The report carries his signature. It was the primary assistant's duty to keep a written record of the coroner's work during the procedure. In actual fact, the coroner merely read over the report at the end and signed it. In other words, Professor Mikotoba witnessed the entire autopsy from start to finish. The defense demands that Professor Mikotoba be summoned as a witness as a matter of urgency. Whatever really happened in that autopsy laboratory 10 years ago is something only he can tell us. The defense's demand is denied. What? But Professor Mikotoba is in London at this very moment. We could summon him to the stand in minutes. Oh, of course he's not going to agree to it. Strongheart has no intention of summoning anyone who knows. He's too concerned about protecting himself. Prosecutor Osogi, let me refresh your memory, as you seem to have forgotten the prosecution's stance. Only minutes ago, you accused the defendant of being the reaper and of masterminding the assassin exchange. I did, yes. So, present your evidence for those claims and make your case complete. At this time, I don't have the requisite evidence, but that's exactly why we need witness testimony. The professor case is closed. There are no clues in the distant past that will bolster your argument today. I'm afraid to say, Prosecutor Asogi, that you would appear to be possessed by the spirit of your late homicidal father. Now, as I stated earlier, this court has already reached a conclusion with respect to the matter at hand. Inspector Gregson was murdered by Japanese Supreme Court Judge Seishiro Jigoku. But as for any hidden circumstances that may exist, they will be investigated in due course by the proper authorities.
Objection!
But we all know what will happen. That'll just give the mastermind of the whole venture time to cover his tracks again. By which you mean me. The punishment for this contemptible behavior will be decided at a later date. As for you, Prosecutor Asogi, you will be remanded following these proceedings, willingly, I trust, since you gave your word. This futile game of revenge is over, young Master Asogi. Who are? That will be all. I hereby declare this trial to be over. Court is... Mr. Sholmes? This is no place for amateur detection, Mr. Sholmes. May I remind you that these proceedings are closed to the general public? We'll leave the courtroom at once. Mr. Sholmes was instrumental in the apprehension of Seishiro Jigoku before he fled from Europe. The court should hear what he has to say. Lord Mail Strongheart, it's imperative that you refrain from bringing this trial to an end at this stage. Is it really? And why would that be? You need only recall your own words from the opening of the trial to answer that question, if I may. We will stop at nothing to uncover the whole truth behind these disturbing findings. Surely it can't be that the shock of being accused of being the Reaper yourself has erased that from your memory, can it? The whole truth, sir, has already been uncovered. It would seem that we have a great many important members of the judiciary present here today. I put it to you, my dear fellows, should the trial end at this juncture? After all, why have you been invited to attend? To nod along to the prevarications of your superiors? Order! Order in the court! It seems to me that we stand before a door that leads to a new era of legal practices. A door that is ajar. Let us emerge from the shadows of the Reaper's decade-long ascendancy. For you, and you alone, my dear fellows, have the power to push this door open now. The auditors in the gallery have no rights to express an opinion in court proceedings. Silence! Please, boy, the judge has absolute authority here. And when he calls the trial to an end, it must end. He literally do. I sense dark things occurring behind the scenes. Dark things indeed. Is there a single person here? What? Trial should go on. Summon the witness. If what? We need to clear this up before these young Japanese fellows in custody. My lord, you assured those present that you would uncover the whole truth here. Vindicate yourself to these outlandish accusations. The truth, the whole truth, the truth, Mr. Giles is in the audience. A toast to my dependent colleagues in the gallery. Well, my lord, you hear the voice of British justice, I take it. I think you'll find it will be rather awkward to silence. The court will recess briefly. I have no intention of shrinking from these allegations. Bailiff, arrange for the subpoena of the witness at once. As soon as the gentleman arrives at the courthouse, we shall reconvene. A recess won't be necessary, my lord. Pardon. Kotoba is a close friend of mine. He accompanied me today and is waiting in the antechamber as we speak. I do believe he has been enjoying a little trip down memory lane, in fact. What? Professor Mikotoba is here in the courthouse? Mr. Sholmes, you didn't know this would happen, did you? My dear fellow, no one is in a better position to answer that question than you, surely. I wasn't just asking for the fun of it, you know. No, I must thank you for your assistance in this matter, Mr. Sholmes. However, you are of no further use here. Kindly leave the courtroom at once. But of course, in truth, I find myself rather busy now as a result of these developments. Mr. Naruhodo. Yes? I trust you have Iris's little lucky charm with you. Absolutely. It's still in my pocket. She sends her regards, and a reminder, if you find yourself at a dead end, the heirs are at your disposal. Just one tug, if you please. Oh, of course. In that case, the trial will continue without delay. Bailiff, show the witness to the stand. So it's Lord Strongheart. He's the Reaper of the Bailey. Where exactly is this trial going to take me, I wonder? Just how deep am I about to be plunged into the blackness of the abyss? Well, I'm ready. I'm ready to head into the heart of this maelstrom. And confront whatever horrors it tries to drown me under. Alrighty then. This should be the last part of the game here. So we'll end this one here, and I'll see you next time.